Kush and Chemtrails, the world's most dangerous podcast.
Yeah, well, this is this episode's trip on this. So, guys, help me bring this motherfucker in, please.
Bro, man, I'm feeling a little
let's
trip
on
space dust.
Trip. Yeah,
Out.
All right.
Nobody should be asked to handle this trip. That's some heavy shit. When you were tripping.
So, this is what I got, man. I started to take notes on this last night, and his research, like I wouldn't do it justice.
This is the one.
Yeah, I wouldn't do it
This is
justice.
the one we've been
this
waiting
is really good,
for.
bro.
Oh, I see
So,
why we really don't need
yeah.
that much this episode then, because we're gonna
we're
check
gonna
this
watch
out.
this.
Okay,
yeah.
cool. Let's check it out, bro.
Let me show you something real quick, bro. This is what got me started on it. Was when you look at, and obviously this will be on the screen right now for the viewers, but.
So if you guys didn't catch what he said, we love you so much that we're not going to try to repurpose this man's stuff and do it justice. We're going to let you make your own discernment. So definitely check this out. It's going to be interesting, and we're going to be giving our feedback as we go through it.
So this is what got me going, that picture right there. Because remember I told you how cool fucking Hebrew was? They took the Star of David. They could make every letter in the Hebrew alphabet out of the hexagram. Crazy, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's part of it, but that's nothing. So as I was doing my research, I was going through all this, and then I found this guy named Stan Tenen. And Stan Tenen did all this research on the book of Genesis, on Torah. Like, it's amazing. So yeah, like I said, I can't do this guy's work justice. Years, decades.
Isn't that impressive, bro?
Yeah,
when somebody is so committed to something like that, bro.
Decades.
It's so, because we've been committed to this knowledge for decades, but when someone commits to one particular sect of that and masters that, I always like clap that up, bro.
It's crazy,
because I just
bro.
don't see myself as, let me not say that, because we never know what we're going to be in life, but that's some crazy focus, bro.
Like, what's his name? Tom O'Neill.
Yeah.
Like, what? He's like, 22 years. I've been researching Charles Manson. Like, whoa.
And low key, when we heard him talk, it made me think the way I think is not bad, because he didn't seem thrilled that he spent that time doing that. Like, he didn't necessarily say he regretted it, but he also kind of said it was a dark time.
Yeah.
It wasn't great. Like, he didn't, it wasn't,
There was a lot.
So I don't know if he really enjoyed the work he did. So
Yeah.
I like to enjoy the work I do.
No, I feel you.
But yeah, that's crazy.
Well,
man. Salute to people that geek out and go hard like that, man.
Check this out, man. This is fascinating, bro. This is mind-blowing. So, yeah, it speaks for itself. So,
What's his name?
Stan Tenen. Tenen.
By Tenen.
Bye. That's a good one. All right, give me one sec. All right. So I'll turn this up for us so we can hear it.
Put us in the love connection, Steve. Pause.
Right? No shit. All right. Check this out. This is dope.
Need some popcorn and shit.
You got it. Can you see it over there, Ron?
Yes, sir.
All right, cool. Yeah. This is fascinating, bro.
Sitting in my apartment in Newton, Massachusetts in 1968, and I had this urge to look at the beginning of Genesis in Hebrew, which was a strange urge considering the fact that I didn't read Hebrew, although I did know the alphabet. Now, I have one talent in this world.
Would we say that's a calling?
Pattern recognizer.
Yep.
It has become evident already.
Hey, you got a cap.
And my eyes fell on the letters. And I could not get it out of my head that there was something peculiar about the sequence of letters. It just didn't look like language to me. Since I couldn't read it, that was a further reason why it didn't look like language.
Tenen, you got a ponytail.
Yeah.
If it had looked like language, if I had been a good student in my earlier days and had learned to read Hebrew, I would have, just like you pick up a piece of paper in any language, you don't start counting letters and look at letter patterns. You simply read what's said there. I never would have seen this. I never learned to read Hebrew, but I did learn to read the alphabet.
So it's good he didn't know the language.
One talent in life is that I'm a visual pattern recognizer. When I see something visual in front of me that makes a pattern, I spot it very quickly. Now, if I could have read Hebrew, this couldn't have happened.
Right.
But because I couldn't read the Hebrew words, my eyes fell on the letters. Now, you know, if you hold up a newspaper and you can read the words, you never look at the letters. It would be very difficult to
You
do.
just read.
But I looked at the letters, and all of the bells and whistles in my brain went off. All those pattern recognizing alarms went off and said there is something most unusual, something peculiar about this sequence of letters. So I asked around, assuming that Genesis was the most heavily researched document going, and people told me they didn't know what I was talking about. I asked a rabbi, I asked a priest, I went over to MIT, I went over to Harvard, nothing. Eventually people told me this must be Kabbalah, it must be Hebrew mysticism. I'd never heard of Kabbalah, so I decided I'd better get educated if I was going to figure out what was going on here. And I realized that if no one knew about this, and there really was some kind of coding in the letters of the text of Genesis, then this could be very important. So, I spent from 1968 until 1978, when we moved to San Francisco, collecting and reading just about every text in English that I could find that was on mystical traditions. I read Kabbalistic material, Hebrew tradition. I read Christian and Muslim. I read Hindu and Buddhist and Taoist and ancient civilizations of all kinds. I read Greek metaphysics, all translations in English, but a very wide gamut. I read things that were even written by people who claimed to be up in flying saucers. I was completely indiscriminate. And I started to put together a sense that
that's true science.
Even though I couldn't figure out what they were talking about.
Indiscriminate.
It was very nice poetry. And yes, there might very well be meditations involved. The literary criticism methods that the academic scholars used to make sense of Kabbalistic texts didn't do much for me. Yes, I could see you compare this sentence to that sentence, but that didn't tell me anything about what the author was saying. It just told me he was saying the same thing here as here. And eventually, after 10 years, I started to build up a sense that these Kabbalistic texts were talking about something. There was just too many details for it to be pulled out of the air. There was just too much commonality to be these texts to be the individual experiences of mystics. There was something that bound it all together, and it didn't matter if I was reading Rosicrucian material or reading Sanskrit material in English translation, or Hebrew material. It all seemed to have the same underpinning. And many others have claimed this too. That there are numerous teachers over the centuries who claim the same thing. But I wasn't satisfied by them simply telling me it was all the same. It didn't look the same, it just felt the same. So the idea was to find out what was going on. Over those years, over the 10 years, I had realized that if there was a pattern in the text, and if I was going to show it to somebody else, then I had to follow the scientific method. People had claimed for centuries that these texts were special. This is a sacred text. But being able to show that to skeptical, technical, modern minds like the people I was associating with was very difficult. So I had drawn up a set of criteria, a set of scientific tests of kind of postulates that I expected to be checked off one by one. I did not want to do what many people do and go and make guesses and get ahead of myself or go fishing, because that would short-circuit the scientific method. It was absolutely essential that I make a plan and I stick to it and I unfold it step by step, just as good science is done. And it finally dawned on me that the first verse of Genesis had a string of 27 letters followed by the 27th letter. It's 28 letters altogether. 27 letters, the 27th letter, and a 27-letter alphabet that comes along with it. 3 statements of 27. 27 is 3 cubed. I said to myself, gee, I wonder what would happen if I counted the letters out in base 3, like threes. Well, I ultimately tried other bases also, but when I counted by threes, interesting things started to happen.
The law of 3.
You know, if you look for 20 years, and you're reasonably clever, you're going to find patterns.
20 years.
There's no big deal to finding patterns. The question isn't whether you can find patterns. The question is whether they have any meaning. If you introduce an idea and it has nothing to do with what you're doing, you won't get any new information out by using that idea. When I shine the light of base 3 on the text, all of a sudden I start to get patterns. The only thing you can tell about this pattern is, one, it certainly isn't a coincidence. And in fact, researchers at UCLA and at Bar-Ilan University in Israel and at Technion in Haifa, Israel, have done statistical tests on the text. They hadn't done it when I first did this, but they have now. And there's no question that there's letter-level coding throughout the 5 books of Moses. When I use base 3 to count out the letters, the whole first verse becomes one unit. There aren't any letters left over. Everything has its place. A rabbinic teaching. And the teaching is that the Torah is eternal. The Torah is unique. It's not just a bunch of stories. It's not like anything else, not even like anything else sacred in Judaism, such as the Talmud, which is extremely important, the basis of Jewish practices in the Talmud.
The basis of Jewish
But
practice,
the
the
Torah can't even
Talmud.
be compared to the Talmud. That would be sacrilege. Torah is so unique, it can only be compared to itself. So I decided to compare it to itself. Seemed reasonable. How do you compare a text to itself? Well, now are we back to literary criticism? Should I look at the first story in Genesis of the creation and the second and compare how they differ? Well, that's already been done. It wasn't very satisfying. And besides, it didn't give me anything new to work with. I'm looking at the letters. So I said, what would happen if I compared the letters to themselves? And that's what I did. You know how you make a paper doll or a paper airplane? Take a piece of paper, you stick tab A into slot A, and you put tab B into slot B, and tab C into slot C. You auto-correlate it. You correlate it with itself. Tab A with slot A, tab B with slot B. And the piece of paper folds up, hopefully, into the model it was intended to make. And so I decided to fold up this string of letters in such a way that letters that were the same were going to be next to each other. I wrote the letters out, one each, on a bead chain, in the order that they were written in the text. So you could literally hold out the bead chain and read the first verse of Genesis.
Crazy.
And then I took the bead chain and curled it up on itself so the same letters lined up. Now, I'm going to hold up the pattern that we got when we associated the letters slot A in
This
tab A,
Yantra.
tab B in slot B, etc., just like the paper pattern. And as you can see, all the letters are accounted for. They're all paired up. And if they're not paired with the same letter, like slot A and tab A and slot B and tab B, they're paired with letters that are in symmetrical positions in the alphabet. So there's a very basic, simple rule that enables all the letters of the first verse to be self-connected, just like the tabs and slots. The reason I started it here, rather than on the edge someplace, is because I realized this was on the surface of a donut, which one could pull through. And I didn't want these lines to cross over in funny ways, so I simply rotated it through itself. But if it were on the surface of a donut, then that would all work as one unit.
Crazy, right?
And so that's what the first verse of Genesis draws. It draws a kind of donut called the two-torus, two-dimensional surface on a torus.
It's mind
So we've now
really.
identified the first verse of
To watch
Genesis.
this a couple times.
It folds itself up into a donut. This is the Bagel theory of reality. You just peel the 7-color map off of the donut, and you have a little vortex. This is the definition of the donut. You don't need the rest of the donut. Mathematicians don't need the dough. They just want to know what the surface is, how it all fits together. Don't. And what we found, and this is really quite startling, is when we simplified it mathematically, we ended up producing a form that looked just like this. This is the form we actually made. This is a minimal geometric way to represent the way the first verse of Genesis forms itself when its letters are paired up, just like making a paper model.
That's the
Now,
first
you
verse of
probably
Genesis
notice,
in geometric
particularly
form.
if you know something of Jewish tradition and teaching, that this looks a little like a flame. And the letters are said to come from the flame or from fire. They were written in fire on the original tablets given to Moshe. If you look at this form from different directions, you can see all shadows, two-dimensional outlines of all the Hebrew letters. We're pretty sure the same form, or some very, very closely related form, produces the Arabic letters.
You heard that, right?
And a related
Produces all
form,
the
but not
letters,
quite the
and
same,
Arabic.
produces the Greek letters.
And Greek.
And so we've got the first verse of Genesis folding itself up into a form that when you look at the form from different directions, makes all the letters in which the text is written.
A human could not
And
have
so we
created
have
that.
our fruit tree
Not
yielding fruit.
maybe so.
Listen to
whose
this.
seed is in itself.
Fruit
And when we
tree,
look at it from
fruit
the
that yields
appropriate
within itself.
directions, for instance, that direction, let me hold it here, it might be easier. We see the Hebrew letter bait. The English equivalent would be the letter B. The Greek would be beta. This object, this entirely asymmetrical object, which in the past we've identified as a flame of consciousness. Hebrew letters are said to come from flame. Arabic letters are said to come from flame. Shadows of that object, of this object, are all of these Hebrew letters. Same one object generates all of these letters of the alphabet.
That's wild, bro.
Wild is not even the word, bro.
Right? It's like what the
Otherworldly, bro.
Yes. Hey, oh, it's about to get even crazier. That's why I just kept. I was blown away, dude, watching this.
So much we don't understand.
Nah, bro. 89. Oh yeah. What they figured out since then?
Or what
Here
we're
is a
remembering.
text
Did we create this?
written in an alphabet that curls itself up into a form that casts shadows that are the letters that the text is written in. Fruit tree yielding fruit whose seed is in itself. That is very self-embedded. That is very self-referential. That's a very reflexive process. It's creating its own letters in which it's written.
A fruit tree yielding fruit within itself.
But don't be overly impressed. If I had taken a coat hanger and bent it up with a couple of squiggles and played around with my shadows, I'd have found all the letters in just about any alphabet. It is not hard to find shadows of a squiggly form that look like letters. It's hard to find a explicit, meaningful form that does that. And so it's the fact that that's a meaningful form that counts, not just that you can make shadowgrams that make letters. We've also discovered, even more startlingly, that this is not just a flame representing the flame of consciousness, but it's also a model hand representing our self-awareness. It's our hand that designates us as special in the animal world. It's our opposable thumb that is associated with our ability to make and use language and to make and use tools. It is from the word for hand in Latin, manus, that we are called humans. And further, it's from the region of our mind that controls our hand that we derive the regions that control our speech.
Dope.
And there is another point that needs to be added. Not only in Hebrew tradition is it taught that the letters are made of fire or flame, but they are also said to come from Yod. And that is taken to mean the smallest letter of the Hebrew alphabet, the letter Yod, which is the component that makes up all the letter shapes. But Yod also means hand, this hand. And when you look at this form from various different positions, you see all of the letters of the Hebrew alphabet. When you make different gestures with your own hands, you see different outlines, different shadows of the same model. In fact, you can see all the Hebrew letters. And you know what? Each Hebrew letter has a name. And the name of the letter Pei, its name means mouth. And you see it when you make this gesture. That's the Hebrew letter Pei. Now you'll see it in my left hand, I'll see it in my right hand. So it's a symmetrical set. This gesture produces the letter Zion. Anybody want to guess what Zion means? How about project? The human hand is the human embodiment of a general principle that projects consciousness into physics. And if we look at that general principle of projection from all the possible directions we can look at it, then we can, in theory, take any path possible in consciousness or in physics. So what we're finding is that there is a general principle that models the way we project our will into the world, which is an analogy for the way, if I can say this, God's will is projected into the world through us. That this is a cascade of creation, that we are in the line of this cascade, and that this is a model of it. So that's what we have here. We have a natural, universal gesture language turned into a formal system for recording and playing back meditational exercises, which can become the true basis for a science of consciousness, which in modern terms becomes a religion, or several religions actually. In fact, that's also what this model talks about. This is very controversial material because, in the words of a friendly scholar, it can't be so. And what, of course, he means is that if it is so, then there's a lot of readjustment to make. And I try to explain to people that this really doesn't say anything like, I'm right, you're all wrong. It says rather that this is a deeper level that integrates a whole range of material. And it demonstrates mostly that what the scholars have been saying and what the religious people have been saying, and what the different religious people have been saying, they've all been right, but in their own contexts. And that if you go deeper, then you find something more common. Let me say it. I think that if we get this right, if we can figure out what this natural unfoldment is, and we keep track of it in the way that was intended, which is going to be the most compact and economical way, we are going to be able to show that the sequence of letters in the text of Genesis is just as determined as the sequence of digits in the decimal expansion for pi. That is a natural artifact of this universe at the 11th level. In fact, that quality is very similar to pi. After all, the text, you're not supposed to change a letter, the destruction of the universe. If you changed any digit in pi, it wouldn't be pi.
And I think your use of the mathematical metaphor here is not just an accident.
No, not at all.
Watch how close they're sitting.
Mathematically, we understand the idea of truth as modeling something experimental that we find in the real world. If someone says they have a truth and they use a spiritual sense, we tend to laugh at them. Well, your truth, whose truth is truth? But if these texts were canonized based on the fact that the sequence of letters was as precise and explicit as the sequence of digits in, say, a universal constant like pi, then we have a whole different understanding of what might have been meant by the various sages of these various traditions claiming they had the truth. This is the letter bet, bait. It's the first letter of the text of Genesis. It's the one translated in the. Its formal meaning is house. But God's not a noun, God's a verb. In Hebrew is a real mode language. That means the primary roots are verbs, not nouns. So it's not a house, it's housing. It's what a house does. A bait represents the distinction between inside and outside. And that's going to turn out to be enormously important. The credo of Judaism, what Abraham is credited with discovering, is the unity of inside and outside. There's a 4-letter name and a 5-letter name for God. The 4-letter name is the transcendent point within. The 5-letter name is all there is, the panoply, the immanence of the universe. Many people over the centuries have had meditational experiences, have come upon that one point of light, that meditational and transcendental point within. And people for centuries have worshipped idols and gods of all kinds. And everyone knows, or at least most people in this room know, that if you do your affirmations, even if it's to a pagan golden calf or something, you're going to get what you want, because the process of affirmation causes manifestation. The key to this teaching, on which the Abrahamic faiths are based, on which the Brahmic faiths are based, is that these two manifestations of deity, of divinity, are identical, are unique. That's what Krishna was saying too. That the God within, the point, the meditational point, And the all there is, the panoply of nature in the physical world without an immanence, are one, are unity. Inside, outside, and the process of resolving them is also unity.
This is the first word of Genesis. Let's look at the first word of Genesis. It's supposed to contain the whole secret. It's supposed to be able to repeat this bait, this basic idea in more detail. So here's the bait, which means in or in the. And then we have this word reshis, which is said to mean at the head of, because the word resh means head. Well, there's another root in here, which is not usually discussed, and that's this root, reshet. Reshet is a woven net, or network. And I'm going to say that the reason the academic statisticians have found letters skip patterns in the Hebrew Bible is because it's a woven document, like a Navajo rug with stripes. And if you unravel it, you get skip patterns on the thread, because that's what the stripes leave. And I'm going to say that that's the kind of coding that was done in the ancient world, and hopefully we'll get to that. This is a wonderful model of everything. By definition, this isn't a jealous God of a petty people who says, my God's bigger and better than your God because it's my God, and it's the one God because I say so. That's not what we're saying here. I'm saying we are starting with a definition of singularity and wholeness. Definitions are not the basis of prejudice. It's a postulate. I'm putting it down to see how good it is. It doesn't give us anything. And if we look for the means of spanning between the one and the many, we have a path that includes everything in the universe. Now, modern physics attempts a bottom-up reconstruction. Take all the diversity we find, all the forces in the world, and pump the energy up until things merge together, and eventually we can extrapolate and find the Big Bang. The one from the many. And I'm saying we can do this abstractly. We can do this topologically in principle without any electron microscopes and cyclotrons and supercomputers. We can start top down by definition, start with a singularity, break it up by minimal first distinction, and end up with all there is. And it's my guess, and this is still a guess, that one way or another, in an extraordinarily elegant way, perhaps the most elegant possible, that's what the sequence of letters in the Hebrew Bible really represents.
If we look at religion, if we look at history as static, then we've got a fossilized structure that's not alive. But if we look at a living tradition, it's just like a living thing. A tree doesn't look the same during all phases of its life. Sometimes it looks like an acorn, sometimes it looks like a tree, sometimes it looks like leaves and branches, sometimes it's all desiccated. Sometimes the new fruit has to fall on the ground to decay. The current phase of the Jewish cycle is to be a vessel. The rabbis have created this incredibly coherent vessel that survived thousands of years of persecution and has continued to carry the Torah intact, and in principle the light in that Torah, the meditation, the science of consciousness in that Torah, through the centuries. Now one doesn't mistake the vessel for the light inside. One doesn't mistake a librarian for a person who has command of knowledge in the encyclopedia. Those are two different functions. The rabbis in our modern times have been brilliant at community building, at maintaining a community that can maintain the Torah and maintain its own integrity and keep the Sabbath. And in fact, that's why I'm honoring that tradition, because if it weren't for people doing that hard work, this well would have dried up. And I am doing research that's benefiting from the sweet water this tradition has preserved. So I have to honor that. And I think that's a very valid way to respond to traditional teachings. We have a vessel. In order to get into the vessel, you have to respect the vessel, you have to be part of it, and then it can open. And then what's inside is worth even more.
Demonstrating to the scientific community
Respect
that
that
traditional
point.
material handed down thousands of years is valid today will provide great respect for the traditional material. And demonstrating to observant people, to religiously intense people, that what they've been protecting and carrying all these
You think
years
he got a
is now
girlfriend?
respected in the world
I'm not sure about that one.
Or be somewhat less offensive. Now I'm generalizing. I don't mean this is some sort of panacea.
What a jerk I am.
This is part of a
valid
legitimate
point, though.
bridge between various seemingly opposite elements in our society, whether it's between science and religion, whether it's between the secular
People wear
world
their
and the
obsession.
observant world.
You can
For
see
sure.
it on them.
These same models also generate
Like, you're
other
smart,
sacred
bro, but get a
alphabets
haircut.
that came later. The Greek alphabet, the Arabic alphabet, are also generated by the same form that the beginning of the text of Genesis draws for us.
Let me show you something real quick, bro. So, this one that I wanted to show you, and then this will be it for this guy. But this is the one with the apple about the flat earth.
That was something else, though, man.
Yeah, it's dope because it's in the text. And I was like, what the fuck? It was dope.
I love your response, Desai. Flat Earth. What are you on some Kyrie Irving shit?
Right? Shit's wild, bro.
How the letters in our hands are the letters in our minds. Shout out to Stan Tenen.
Yeah.
Hello, my name is Stan Tenen, and I'm the Director of Research for the Meru Foundation, and I'm assuming that most of you already know that. This is an update of some recent work. For the first time, I think we are able to show a provisional presentation of how the letters are related to hand gestures. And if you recall, that's very important for our thesis. The basis of one of the most important ideas that we have is that the text of Genesis, and perhaps other canonized portions of canonized texts, of sacred texts, record letter-by-letter meditations. And if you recall, in the past, we were basing all of our letters on shadows of this shape, which we've identified as a flame initially. We also identified it, put that down, as the model of a fruit, with this being the seed, this being the fruit tree, and this being the volume of the fruit, such as an apple, and thus fitting the description in the introduction to the Zohar of a fruit tree, which is here, yielding fruit whose seed is in itself. And this is a model, as I've said on the Matrix of Meaning for Sacred Alphabets tape, of naked recursion, a minimum geometric representation of the propensity of the universe to propagate itself, to recur, to re-embed itself, to put a new seed capable of growing into a tree with new fruit inside of every fruit on the tree. Continuous self-embedment. And as we know mathematically, self-embedment is a model for hyperdimensionality, and it's part of our thesis that hyperdimensional mathematical concepts relate to the space in which consciousness takes place. But there's a major problem with our thesis as we presented it over the years, and that is it's been difficult to understand how you could turn this form around in your mind's eye so as to display the letters of the alphabet in the order given in a sacred text. If you can't turn the model around to display the letters in order, then you can't do the meditation. And to do that means you have to be able to visualize this form and rotate it somehow in your mind. Well, to make our long story short, and based on the material presented in a Matrix of Meaning for Sacred Alphabets, we've also identified the form as a model human hand. And here's a somewhat bigger one than we've had in the previous models. And as you can see, it's got a thumb, and there's a tip. And this represents the highest point of consciousness. This is where the star of seeds would be in a fruit. This is our mind. And out here we've got 4 fingers. You could almost say they are 4 rivers feeding the tree of life. Let me get it upside down here so you can see it. The tree in the middle of Eden. If you look at it this way, you could actually see how the model, put the other one down, could represent, if I rotate it, makes it a disc plane. Maybe you can see it better this way if I rotate it. You would define a disc around the base here. There'd be a star here and a crescent here. This is a reflector. This is a source. So you can identify this with the sun and this with the moon if you'd like. This with inside and this with outside. This is the seed. This again is the fruit. And the whole model is a model human hand. There would be 3 hands together, or 6 in some other configurations, that would make the whole fruit, and it depends on how it's arranged. I'll show you that hand very directly. This is important. If you look at a model fruit, here is an apple.
The booty be like.
Now, if this were a real fruit, if you went down the stem, you would come into the middle where there'd be a star of seeds in the middle, and the flower end would be here, and there'd be a hole. We could draw a deeper notch down the middle to go into the seeds in the middle. Now, the reason we realized this was a hand is once we had drawn these lines, which represent the edges of a particular kind of knot, which we'll get into later in the tape if we have time, or on a supplementary tape, what you realize is that this can be very much like a kind of bowling ball, where if you could put your thumb down into the middle, you could grasp between each of these edges. And it would look, if I can display it for the camera, just like a hand. Remember, my thumb is going into the middle, and what I'm saying is that each of these regions, from here to here, would be a hand.
So it's
and
shaped
of course,
just
there'd be
like that
3
flame.
hands,
And it
as they
goes
go
inside.
around. I'll show it to you from here. There's three hand-shaped sections, and so there'd be 4 fingers in each one, the thumb in the middle. There'd be 12 fingers around the perimeter.
That's why these kids dumb.
And thus you have 12
and shit.
tribes around the seed center, the star, the tabernacle, if you'd like. In other traditions, there are 12 apostles, there are 12 knights around the round table, there are 12 imams of Shia Islam, there are 12 houses to the zodiac.
Yeah, I know you were watching this shit.
There are a whole number of 12 around 1 forms. And in the middle, of course, if we were to open it, this disc, I don't know if you can see this very well, but the disc is the flat earth.
Oh.
This is where, I'll put it inside, maybe you can see the hand in there. You put the hand inside, this disc becomes the earth, there's the sun, this is the heavens, the dome. And what we've got in our model, again, is a model hand. Now, why a model hand? Well, now we're going to get back to the discussion. The hand, the human hand, is a form that is automatically possible to be visualized by human beings. Even a child, even a blind person, can see their own hand. If you close your eyes, you can try it right now with me on the camera. Just close your eyes and point towards something. Move your fingers any way you'd like. Move your hand any way you'd like. You can see where your hand is pointing. There, I'm saying how. Well, I know that my fingers are up and my thumb is pointing this way, well, etc. And when I open my eyes, I see it's correct. We each know our own hands. Now, since the letters are shadows of this model hand, as I tip my hand, I can immediately see the letters. And that's what we found. Now, why should that be? Well, it makes sense because the hand is the means by which we project our conscious reality, our conscious wills, into the physical universe. We dispense our consciousness into physicality by means of the hand. The human hand is the human embodiment of a general projective principle. The Kabbalistic tradition teaches that the universe is created by the will of God, not the essence of God. We express our will in the physical world with our hands. Metaphorically, God expresses the creation of the universe, dispenses it into physicality as an unfurlment, as a projection of his will. And that's the model being presented. Now, I'll go into more of the details later, but I'd like to go through the letters. We've got to back up one more small step. And I'm not going to do this with the charts that I usually show. I'm going to try to...
I just wanted you to see the flat earth part.
That's good stuff, bro. It's pretty mind-blowing, man.
Dude, absolutely mind-blowing.
I'm blown away, man. That's cool. That's thank you to this guy for taking the time to 20 years, man.
Bro. And so basically what he like I said, what he came up with, and I was telling you earlier too, Ron, was this is a code that was sent so that we could experience divinity through, our human bodies.
Yeah,
like
the chakra.
Like an instruction written back, like if we sent something somewhere for someone, a satellite or something to build, whatever it was, you send an instruction manual, but they wrote, what's crazy is this book is we already talked how it's a double entendre, right? Because you have the main stories, and then they're symbolic as well. So that's a double entendre. Now it's triple. Now there's a code to reach consciousness through there as well. That's insane.
Yeah, that's awesome though, because it brings a lot of stuff we talked about together too, like when we talked about like the meaning of life and consciousness, and we were talking about how everything is coded just to reach its potential and recreate, and you just pretty much sum that up in a shape.
That thing's crazy.
And then all the languages that were brought forth because of it, like that's a trip, bro. Just like how you said though, their light languages, even that, like these little things that we learn, is just like, that's why our language that we speak, English, doesn't feel like as impactful.
Kush and Chemtrails, the world's most dangerous podcast.